Hey, everybody, this is Cameron, and welcome to this discussion about David Lynch and Mark Frost's Twin Peaks. My guest today is Mike Hogan from Vanity Fair. You may have read his amazing article that came out just a little bit ago called As Twin Peaks Turns 35, The Mystery is Still the Message for a World of Fans. And I have to say, Mike, before we start, that I reached out to you because not only is this an incredible article / retrospective, but it's also because you had the details right. And so I knew you were a real honest to God Twin Peaks fan, because a lot of times when these retrospectives come out, they always like to say that David Lynch left season 2 to make Wild at Heart. And you actually, thank you, corrected it, because I've been doing this for over a decade now, trying to say, no, that's not the order of things. So thank you, Mike. I really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's so great to be here, Cameron. Thanks for having me on.
Where did you come up with this idea to do this article? Was this a recent thing? I believe you said that you spent the year before kind of going back and rewatching the whole series. So was this something that you were just doing for fun and then decided to write an article, or were you always intending to write an article and just David Lynch's passing kind of took it over the top?
Both, in the sense that I was doing it for fun, really as procrastination and as an escape. Probably end of 2023, 2024. I was supposed to, at the time when I was supposed to be watching all the Oscar screeners to get ready for our Oscar party at Vanity Fair. Every time I would say, I really ought to watch like movie X, I would just watch another episode of Twin Peaks. And before I knew it, I had gone through, season 1, season 2. The Fire Walk with Me was the first time I actually watched Missing Pieces, because my last rewatch had been right before The Return. Mm-hmm. And it was my only second time through The Return. And I don't know, I was in some kind of weird state of mind, as one sometimes is in life and when going down a Twin Peaks hole. And I really became sort of obsessed with trying to figure it out finally. I had the first time I watched seasons 1 and 2 straight through was in 1998. I lived in Ireland for a year abroad after college, and I had a Welsh flatmate who couldn't believe that I'd never seen Twin Peaks. He was like a real British TV snob. He basically was like, it's the only good TV show your people have ever made. Like, how have you not watched the whole thing? So, and then we were living in Ireland and they played it every Friday night. So we had a whole ritual around watching it. So I did really get to watch it like week in, week out. Then I made my wife watch seasons 1 and 2 with me and The Return when it aired. But this time I was like, I'm going to finally figure this thing out. Like, I've never really understood what was going on beyond the big picture stuff. The first time through The Return, I was basically baffled, right? And so I just started Googling everything. And that's when I really came to understand that there were a lot of other people who had put an enormous amount of thought into this, and we're still putting an enormous amount of thought into this. The Twin Peaks subreddit, probably there are posts today that have 700 comments, with new kind of theories about what happens in this scene or that scene. Basically, I Googled every scene. There was a Reddit thread. There was, a Twin Peaks wiki thing. There was so much stuff. And so it was really exciting and fun to sort of go fully down the rabbit hole. And the whole time I think I knew, like, there isn't some answer that's going to change my life, but I felt like there was. I couldn't shake that feeling. And so eventually I kind of realized, like, I want to write about this, because I sort of ended up with a hunch that, like, there's almost a trilogy of meaning. There's David Lynch, there's Mark Frost, and all the people who made the show, and then there's the fans, and you can't really understand the show without the fans and all of the creativity that they've brought to it to kind of fill in the blanks that I think Lynch and Frost intentionally left. So then I started talking to people, and I was trying to get to David Lynch. I was just about to ask my boss to ask Laura Dern to put me in touch with him. I had asked Kyle, and then he passed away tragically. So, but that certainly lent a new, kind of timeliness to the story.
Is one of the greatest elements, I think, of the fandom is that Twin Peaks exists kind of in the space between you and me, and like Frost and Lynch, and it's like everyone came in with the best of intentions, and even the things that you may not think work right away, like they become endearing later in life. I mean, like, people love to talk about that midsection of season 2, right? That before it picks up into the Annie Wyndham Earl section, and they always say like, "Oh, that's the roughest part of being a Twin Peaks fan is that section." And it's like, I don't think it is, because almost every episode has something, usually more than one amazing thing in it. I
Yes.
don't think that there is an actual bad episode from start to finish of the show that you can say you can just skip that one, because everything has something in it. There might be so one of the things I like to say is, even if there's a subplot that you don't particularly care for, it's still written well, it's still directed well, it's still acted well. You may not it may not appeal to you. Let's say, for instance, let's say the James and Evelyn one is always talked about, right?
Yeah.
But they're not bad scenes. Like, they're very well done. It's just that
Yeah.
it's just that people don't they don't want the James Hurley spinoff show. They want to get back to Twin Peaks,
Yeah.
And
It's funny. I mean, I talked to Harley Payton. I mean, I have to give Harley Payton credit. Really, he was the first person I talked to, and because I had talked to another reporter that he had emailed to correct the record about what you mentioned at the beginning about the timeline of when Lynch was on Wild at Heart. That was like almost a starting place of my reporting. I was like, that's strange. I didn't know that. So I called him. We had a great conversation. He connected me to Mark Frost. It was like one thing after another. But Harley wrote all the James and Evelyn stuff, and even he will be like, "Look, is this my finest work? No, I'm much more proud." He also wrote, "Every day, give yourself a present." Right? He's like, "That I'm very proud of. I know that was great." And this one, okay, maybe not so much. But he and Mark Frost have affection, I think, for that stretch of episodes, and I have affection for that stretch of episodes, and also, like, one of the many thought exercises I did a lot of like waking up in the middle of the night and writing a bunch of stuff down while I was trying to figure this all out. And one of the things thought exercises I had was like, suddenly I realized, oh, it's Twin Peaks. Everything is doppelgangers. It's, it's light and dark. It's good and evil. It's this and that. And you could even say, in a way, with those episodes, it's like successful and unsuccessful. Like, they're parts of Twin Peaks, even the stuff that doesn't work is like part of what makes you love it, I guess, after a while. And the only other thing I'd say is, David Lynch is so into music, right? And Christabel, when I talked to her, she mentioned that their last album, which is very out there, that at one point Lynch said, people just need to listen to this 3 times and then they'll get it. And I think the show kind of works that way too. It's like it really rewards rewatches. And I think that that's something that's really special and wonderful in a world of a lot of disposable entertainment. This is something with a vision, with depth, that the more times you watch it, the more you get out of it, obviously, given that we're all still talking about it.
So one of the things that I think was the problem with that middle stretch, you can get through that block in about 3.5 hours. But in real life, it was like 3.5 months.
Yeah.
So that's why I feel like people got restless with the show, because it was 3.5 months of your life as opposed to an afternoon. Right?
Yeah.
Now you can kind of just churn your way through it, and it's not that bad, But when they were like having Andrew Packard come out and then taking a 2 or 3 week break after Thanksgiving, it was like, that's the cliffhanger you're going to leave us with? Like, I would have preferred you end it with Major Briggs disappearing and then go to Thanksgiving break, But
yeah, yes.
So I think that a lot of the new fans, I try to communicate with them about, like, you have it so good because for 20 years we had to rely on our original VHS recordings. Once it hit Netflix and then the gold DVD box set came out in the mid 2000s, then it was like, okay, everybody could get back on board. And I think that's what steamrolled season 3 eventually, because it was just picking up.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it was great. I mean, Josh, we were talking earlier about Josh Eisenstadt, who's such a linchpin of the no pun intended of the fandom. I feel like, and he was the one who kind of helped me understand that timeline. That when the show went to Netflix, there was this big burst of enthusiasm, and it was not long after that that Frost, came to Lynch and said, "I've got an idea for how to do this," and I really think that they credit Kyle MacLachlan certainly credits the fans with willing that into existence, but also who knows, because he also says that Lynch loved Twin Peaks and kind of like it was a world that he kept returning to over and over again throughout his life, with or without. But how wonderful that he was able to, after obviously whatever the heck he wanted to say about season 2 and whether he was there or whether he wasn't there, obviously I can understand this, like if I work at a magazine, like we have to put something out every month. It is possible to be there and also, be a little bit creatively checked out. Like I've seen it happen, put it that way. Right. And so I can understand him being like, yeah, I don't feel connected to that stuff. But in the return, we've got something that is, as Christabel put it in the story, pure David, like to the point where Frost says he didn't even ever see a cut. It was just Lynch just took it and was like, okay, thank you for working out all the story with me, writing the script with me. And then he just made it. And it seems like it was after that, Christabel talks about she and David would just have conversations as Tammy Preston and Gordon. Kyle says he would have conversations with David as Cooper and Gordon. Adele Jones told me she would have conversations she would see him and he would say, Lieutenant Knox, wherever they were. Like he was really inhabiting the world, especially after making the return, which is kind of a beautiful thing, and right up until the end, I think that was the case.
Well, the return definitely feels, as I've said many, many times, a summation work. I mean, there's so many references to all of his films, even Dune. At one point when Kyle's looking over the castle walls and you see the ocean, it looks like Duke Leto Atreides, looking over over his castle. But I also think it's just different times in the man's life, because when season 2 was being made, he was top 3 hottest directors at that time. I mean, I like to say 1990, we had Wild at Heart and seasons 1 and 2 and the Industrial Symphony and his Fox show American Chronicles. And I mean, the guy was everywhere in 1990, right? So
yeah, it was an insane amount of output, like crazy. Yeah.
Right. So when you get to the return, obviously he's a busy man still, but he had more time to relax and immerse himself into the work. But it is funny though to read so many times when people write that he left season 2 to make Wild at Heart, when all you have to do is look and see that he won the Palme d'Or in May of 1990 when season 1 was airing.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Like I had always heard that he was there during season 2 because as an executive producer, he had to sign off on everything, right? And that he was kind of thinking about doing Ronnie Rocket because he had so much kind of heat on him,
Yeah.
And then that kind of fell through, and that when he did or was working on those last 6 episodes of Twin Peaks, and people like to say, oh well, he came back and directed that season 2 finale and he was great and all that. Yes, but keep in mind he was there for that entire 6 episode block because he's playing Gordon Cole throughout it.
Yeah.
Right. So and that 6 episode arc is about the length of season 1 minus the pilot, right? And so it feels like everything's coming together. And so when he's like, I really love Twin Peaks again, I want to dive back into, this world and let's do Fire Walk with me, since Ronnie Rocket, I guess, isn't going to happen right now. But what I always found so interesting, and I didn't even really, I was very confused by this for the longest time, just from a production standpoint. And it has only been the last couple of years that I've been really kind of piecing it together, is that why certain things in the movie look like the show and other things don't. And it's because if the set existed in the last 6 episodes, they were able to use it for the movie. But for instance, like Harold Smith's house, they broke down because, spoilers, his character died in the first half of season 2. So they had changed the set. So they had to rebuild his house for the movie. And that's why Cooper's hotel room in The Missing Pieces, when he's doing the House Annie, is the same one as the show, because that was the last scene they filmed for the finale.
Wow, that's perfect. It's interesting because, you know, because Harley Peyton and Bob Engels are obviously really key figures, right, in all of this. And I talked to Harley quite a lot, and actually Harley came with his daughter to the real Twin Peaks event, you know, on Twin Peaks Day in Snoqualmie this year, and so we actually had dinner. He texted me. We were all at Josh's trivia thing. I hadn't seen him yet, and he texted me and said, "I'm at trivia and I don't know any of the answers."
Right.
You know, and so we ended up having dinner that night, and Harley, I think it was not easy for him, you know, working on the show. He's been open. I mean, I didn't get into it in the story, but he's been open about having a big run-in with Lynch where, you know, David tried to change a bunch of stuff the night before shooting, and it was going to create a lot of chaos. And Harley had to call Mark Frost on the set in New Orleans making his movie. And, you know, and David Lynch got super pissed off at him. And I think it was like pretty icy after that. And so I wasn't sure what to expect when I talked to Bob.
Right.
And Bob was like, yeah, we had the best time. Bob was just like all good vibes. Like he and David clearly just had a lot of fun, you know, whenever they were together, which is what David and Mark Frost had when they were at their best, right? Like David Lynch talks about when they're writing those early things, One Saliva Bubble or the Lemurians, you know, he just describes it as like laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing and writing and laughing and writing and laughing and writing. So I think he kind of found that again in Bob. And so it's interesting that, you know, they then went off and made Fire Walk With Me, which of course is like not a fun movie, you know, it's like incredibly dark. But those, you know, David found another sort of easy, for him, like working relationship there. And I do think it's interesting. I mentioned in the piece that, you know, he kind of tries to disavow a lot of season 2, but no matter how unpopular Fire Walk With Me was, he didn't disavow that ever. He was just like, no, that's the movie I wanted to make. And of course, like over time, I think it's gained a lot of, you know, critical acclaim back. I mean, I loved it from the beginning. I never really understood what people didn't like about it. I get that it has a different vibe, you know. I mean, my biggest complaint is actually Cheryl Lee's wig. That's the one thing that bothers me in the whole movie.
All right, 2 points. One is I always like the joke that Twin Peaks season 2 in 1992 was cut in half, and all the goofy parts became on the air, and all the dark stuff became Fire Walk With Me.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Right. Okay, so my stance on Fire Walk With Me is, I mean, obviously it's different now than it was then, and I really liked it then. I saw it twice in the theater. Really enjoyed it. My beef with the movie at the time, and for a while, even though I really liked the movie, was nothing that was in the film.
Yeah,
I didn't have a problem with anything in the movie. I had a problem with what wasn't in the movie. I know he didn't want to come back because of what the scene was supposed to be, but like, how do you tell Laura Palmer's story and not mention Ben Horne once in the movie? He's kind of a crucial character. Yeah. I get maybe the Audrey, you could get away with that, but Ben Horne, how much of the original series is us thinking that Ben Horne is a probable killer of Laura Palmer? And then some people saw Fire Walk With Me first before they saw the series, and so when they're watching it, they're going, what's all this Ben Horne stuff? You know, we know who did it.
Right. Yeah. And whether or not he killed her, like Ben Horne plays a pretty significant, sinister role in Laura Palmer's life. You know,
I think that if he knew he was going to cut out all these other characters from the series, I don't know if he would have written Fire Walk with Me in the style, because all of those scenes were meant to weave in and out of each other. If he knew he was just going to do Laura Palmer scene on top of Laura Palmer scene on top of Laura Palmer scene, there wouldn't have been such a stop start to the narrative, because the movie does kind of feel like a bunch of little vignettes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I feel like that's David, right? It's like he was very bold about making those kinds of decisions and just being like, just forget all this stuff, because he really was interested in the emotional effect and the kind of visual effect and the aesthetic effect, right? And I feel like that I hesitate to oversimplify who was responsible for what in the Mark Frost David Lynch relationship, but I do think that Mark Frost himself would say he was probably more interested in that kind of like story coherence than David. David was not terribly interested in that. He's basically like the Pink Room. He's just like, I'm just going to let it run, and actually like, let's make it as loud as possible and use the subtitles so you can barely understand what they're saying. And like, what is that? A 15-minute scene? It's incredible. You obviously could have gotten a lot of other characters in if you had done a contemporary fast cut thing in 15 minutes. You could have achieved a lot, but he wanted that, and it is incredible, so
but then when you go back to Blue Velvet and that he was the sole screenwriter on that, and that is a tight
film, true,
right? So David Lynch could do story when he wanted to do story,
totally. But I guess the other thing is, it makes me think of many great artists who, like, their early stuff is more conventional as they are being forced to mold their vision to a template that people are like, yeah, okay, now you've got a movie, like, kind of like go back and write it again, make sure that it, like, this stuff doesn't make sense. And when you get more power and freedom in your career later on, you can just be like, I'm just going to do it this way because this is what I like. And I think there's value to both, but It does seem like by the time you get to Inland Empire, it's like nobody's telling David Lynch anything what to do. He's doing exactly what he wants, and that's that.
He's got the camcorder and everything. He's out in Poland, making Laura Dern stand out in negative 30 degrees with a tank top on. Also, I like the joke that when season 3 came out, that it was sort of like a redemption tour. It was Lynch wanting to redeem Fire Walk with Me, and Mark Frost trying to tie Fire Walk with Me into the mythos because he wasn't involved with it. And so season 3 makes Fire Walk with Me 10 times better in retrospect, because you need Fire Walk with Me to bridge to season 3.
Totally. Yeah. And it's just like, I mean, Philip Jeffries and David Bowie and Judy, like all that stuff. I mean, I talked to Mark Frost about it a little bit, and he was, basically was just like, yeah, there was some cool stuff in Fire Walk with Me. And again, earlier I admitted that I am not detail oriented, and I said, didn't Garmin Bozia come from Fire Walk with Me? And Mark was like, no, you're wrong. Garmin Bozia was in the original. Okay, never mind. But certainly Judy, what the hell is Judy? Is that just like something that seemed, Scott Ryan has the whole thing like, that just probably seemed to David Lynch like a funny thing for a monkey to say, and then next thing you know, Mark has probably Mark has had the idea with David to like turn that into maybe like the ultimate evil in the entire universe, right?
Philip Jeffries does. I mean, Philip Jeffries does mention Judy in his scene, and originally, from what I was told, is that they were going to do a whole thing with Josie's sister being named Judy and all that.
Yes,
and so I mean, obviously that wasn't ever filmed, unlike James Hurley's mother, that they apparently filmed for season 1 and kept that footage and has never been released. They were gonna do a whole subplot. Remember when he's like complaining to Donna on the gazebo, like, I saw my mom and she was drunk and in a hotel, and I was like, we didn't see that scene. Well, apparently they did make it. So, but yeah,
that's what I mean. That is what I have loved about getting deep into the show, getting deep into, you know, all the stuff that the fans have collected in terms of, you know, between the crazy theories and all of the really great real information that fans have collected and shared. And it just, you find yourself, I find myself just sort of really admiring the creativity that David and Mark both had to be like, well, this may have started off as an idea about Josie's sister, but like, what can we do with that? You know, we're not going to talk about Judy. That's a pretty like interesting thing to say for somebody who seems to be like coming in and out of our dimension. Like, what could it mean? And I think where I landed was that both Mark and David are incredibly ambitious storytellers. I mean, Mark is like, if you read the books that he was working on while David was shooting The Return, they're wildly ambitious. Like, he's stitching Judy into every piece of American, you know, conspiracy theory history, going all the way back to Lewis and Clark and beyond. You know, while David and Harley was very like, you know, don't sleep on Mark Frost's contribution to episode 8. You know, like yes, David created an incredible visual thing, but I think that came from Mark. That was like, you know, that sort of wildly ambitious, like, we're going to take this mythology we've built and take it all the way to the splitting of the atom, right? We're going to like show how this act of hubris by humanity brought a new form of evil into the universe and a new form of good. And that good is Laura Palmer. Like, you know, they are really taking gigantic swings in a way that is super fun.
It is the true backstory of how the lodges were created. You know, it's done abstractly, sure, but it's there, right? You know,
yes,
it's like
it's all laid out, right? And the other thing you learn from watching David Lynch and watching Twin Peaks is really great nonverbal storytelling, right? It's and the fans. That's another thing that the fans have just helped me so much with, because I'm like slow on the uptake, you know. And then I'm reading a Reddit thread, and I'm going, oh God, yeah, you're right. Like, all of this it's laid out. It's all on the screen, you know. But you have to know how to interpret, you know, the visual style and the visual language of David Lynch.
It also helps to, if you have a lot of autobiographical background on both creators, you can kind of not necessarily see it coming, but you know where this is drawing from, and you know, and it's funny you when you mentioned Harley Payton, you talked about the Beatles' White Album, and I think there is sort of a John and Paul thing with Mark and David, and you felt that all the way through season 1. John was a word person and Paul was a music person, but that's not entirely true, because Paul wrote great lyrics and John wrote great music. And I think the same thing with David and Mark. Some of the things that they think are like very visual, you know, they'll attribute to David, but sometimes it was Mark, and sometimes Mark's words were David's words. You know, there's a lot of people that would blame Mark Frost and other creators for the Josie and the doorknob moment, right? And they would say, oh, you know, that's just people trying to be weird like David Lynch, and you could see why the show was off its rails. And then, of course, it comes out that was David Lynch's idea to put her in the doorknob.
Totally. Yes. Yeah.
And Harley Payton told me once that he went, "We're doing what?" So all the people online that were complaining that it was just, you know, Mark Frost and Payton and Bob Ingalls trying to be David Lynch when they're not as cool as David Lynch, that was David Lynch's idea.
Yeah.
And if you notice, that episode came right before the last 6 episode arc of season 2.
Yeah. Now, I do feel like David as a director might have been able to pull it off a little bit better, but still.
No, I'm just saying idea-wise.
Conceptually, yes. We know who to blame for that one, or to credit, as the case may be.
I you know what? How else I mean, what other beautiful way could you get Joan Chen off the show to make Oliver Stone's Heaven and Earth, but by doing that, by placing her in the doorknob so she could come back at some point, right?
Right.
And then yeah, and so I was convinced, as a lot of other people were, that she was the noise that Ben Horne was hearing in season 3. Obviously, that wasn't the case, but I was convinced that was going to be her.
What do we think the noise was the portal that Cooper goes through, or we don't even know what the noise just was?
Well, it's just the noise of the basement of, where the boiler room area, I guess. But yeah, I do feel like that was a little missed opportunity to get a little Josie reference in there.
Yes.
Because there is a moment in season 2 where Ben Horne is kneeling in his study after talking to Audrey, and he hears a noise and turns around, and that was, this is supposed to be like a shock Josie moment. There's also a moment where Pete's at the airport when Audrey's having her little tryst with John Justice Wheeler, and he's talking to Josie like there in at the airport in spirit. So there are illusions that she didn't go away. Right? So
yeah, I guess, I mean, does this sound right? Just as we're talking, I still think it's valid to say David would do something like, there's gonna be a noise, and you're both gonna be confused about what the noise is, like for its own sake, just to have something weird happening because it's kind of interesting. And then Mark would, generally speaking, be the one who'd be like, we have to figure out a way to work this into the story and make it mean something. Like, it's just, Mark's always like, but Chekhov's gun does have to fire at some point, David. It does feel like that was part of the dynamic.
Well, I'm going to credit Mark Frost, even though I have no idea if he was the one who did this, but seems like what he would do. When they put the Alcave ring on George Griffith's character, Ray, and then he's in the lodge, I thought to myself, I get it now. I get how the ring works. Because for a long time in Fire Walk With Me, it was like, don't take the ring. No, wear the ring. Don't take the ring. And then it's like, oh, I get it. If you wear the ring, you're going to the lodge. And that explains in Fire Walk With Me why Laura is at the lodge at the end. Because she put on the ring.
Yeah.
There is method to the madness. It's just not a bunch of random surrealistic strokes.
I agree. You're right. These things make sense at some level, like they do cohere at some level, but there's a lot that's also open-ended, and,
sure.
and I feel like that's the fun.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just saying that it's not just willy-nilly things just thrown on a canvas.
Well, and that's what's that I think is what's so amazing about it, is to get you to care about something that doesn't make sense. It has to always be almost making sense, it has to, and one way of doing that is to like dole out enough Easter eggs and answers along the way that you're it's like training a dog. Like, you don't give them a treat every time, you give them a treat every third or fourth or fifth time. And that's how they become truly addicted. It's like, you get a lot of answers, you just don't get all the answers. And it feels like this all makes sense. It's just that your brain is like not able to keep track maybe of everything.
The thing that ties it all together, you take out the writing, the directing, the great acting, I don't think this works at all without Angelo Badalamenti's music. Because even if you are confused, you understood the scene emotionally through the music.
Yeah.
Even when all the characters are having a wake for Leland Palmer, they're having a wake for a serial killer in this town that just 2 days earlier brutally beat the hell out of Madeline Ferguson in their living room. They're having a wake for him and having spiritual talks about things, and it's just like, but the music's so lovely you don't even realize that they're having a wake for a serial killer. I
agree. I definitely think Julie Cruz is going to be my number 1 through 5 on my Spotify Wrapped this year, for sure.
Have you ever sat through the Industrial Symphony #1?
No, I need to do that.
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've read it. I've read quite a bit about it. I need to just watch it.
Yeah, it is what it is. I mean, it's just it's Julie Cruz floating. It's Michael J. Anderson sawing logs and nude models climbing over cars. But it's set to a lot of the music that would later be used in Twin Peaks. So
Yeah, I'll probably love it.
oh, it's great. And I think that when the inevitable 4K release of Wild at Heart gets released, that has to be on as a special feature because he has Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern reprising Sailor and Lula in it.
Right. Yes. Yes.
So it has to be a bonus feature. It's on if Criterion releases it or something like that. Like, please, it's essential. This is actually not complete without it.
Where are you? You sound far away.
Yeah. Well.
What's wrong?
Yeah, totally. But yeah, what a year, 1990, utterly insane.
I mean, if there was ever a year to fall in love with David Lynch, it was that year. And you had to be there unless you knew how to program a VCR. There was no, there's no streaming, no YouTube, nothing. It's like, so you had to be there Saturday night, 10 o'clock. And it was fine because I was 14 years old. I didn't have a car. And I was just like, okay, here we go. And I was all excited. And it was just an amazing time. And in fact, I told Kyle when I met him that he was sort of the Luke Skywalker for me, because I mean, I was really young when Empire and Jedi came out, and I liked Star Wars, but in 1990 Star Wars was gone at that point. I mean, you could rent the tapes, but it had been 7 years, and Kyle was between Dune and then Blue Velvet and then Twin Peaks. It was sort of like the trilogy of Luke Skywalker growing up into a man, right? And I was like, you were my Luke Skywalker. And I think he understood what I meant, because it was just like he meant so much to so many people. But to me, he was like, I know it sounds ridiculous, but like in many ways, what you wanted to be as like a man.
Yeah. Well, and it was cool talking to Kyle, and one of the things that I hadn't really realized until, because one of the things that's so great about David and Mark too is that they boldly cast people, whoever they were, based on whether they were going to be good for the role, right? And Lynch, obviously we all know Harry Goes was the driver, and Frank Silva was the set dresser, and all the rest of it. But I said that to Kyle, that, David really had the courage to like pluck people from obscurity. And he goes, talk about plucking people from obscurity. He's like, I was nowhere when he cast me in Dune, and then it flopped. And I figured that was it. My career was over. And then he came back and cast me in Blue Velvet. Like, Kyle, I never really thought about it, but like, that is awesome that Lynch was just like, nope, you're my guy. And we're going to make another run. And that time it was a huge success. I mean, it was an indie or an art movie success versus a blockbuster failure, but then it led to Twin Peaks. And I think for Kyle, like at the time, he was really trying to become a leading man. He's had a fabulous career, but I think looking back, he has some regrets about, at least about, insisting on wearing a flannel shirt. He's like, I probably just could have worn the suit the whole time.
I love that detail in your article, because I was unsure of why that happened,
Yeah.
But I do remember hearing the stories when David Lynch came back for those final 6 episodes. He says, Cooper is going back into the black suit.
Yeah.
And,
he said, when we talked about it, he said, he had a team, and they were, rightly so. They were trying to chart a path for him to become a leading man. And they kind of got in their head, like, if he just wears the same outfit in every single episode, he's going to be typecast as like a, cop or something. And we want him to show some range.
Well, he did it. He did with his personality.
Yeah. I think it was it's one of those kind of silly things that probably wasn't a great idea, but you can see how it happened, at the time.
A while back, I was watching the new 4K of The Doors, and Oliver Stone is on there doing an interview, and he says something that I had never heard before, and that is about a month or so before they started shooting, Heather Graham was going to be Pamela Corson.
Oh,
and
wow.
and then Kyle was going to be Ray Manzarek, and it was going to be literally Twin Peaks, Annie and Cooper together.
Wow.
And then the studio said, no, we want someone more commercial, understandably. And so they bring in Meg Ryan, who honestly looks more like Pamela than maybe Heather Graham.
In that.
But it would have been insane if it had been Cooper and Annie on the opposite sides of Val Kilmer for the Doors.
Man, how does that movie hold up? I haven't seen it. You and I are the same age, basically, and
Yeah.
I haven't seen it since it came out, basically. I loved it when it came out, but I was a kid.
Well, I just find it amazing how when a filmmaker directs two entirely different films in the same year. So Oliver Stone had The Doors and JFK come out in 91.
Yeah.
Spielberg had Jurassic Park and Schindler's List in 93.
That was nuts. Yeah.
Victor Fleming had The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind in 39. It's like, what?
Yeah.
I think Kyle is great in The Doors. And what I've noticed with Kyle is that when he's working with a strong director with a vision, doesn't have to be a taskmaster, but just someone with a vision, he's really great in it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the projects, I'll probably cut this out, but sometimes the projects where he's allowed to kind of just, like a lot of actors, do their own thing.
Yeah.
He's not as focused, I don't feel like. When Molly Ringwald was in a John Hughes movie, she was great.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see her in another film and she might be all right, but she's not as focused as when she's working with John Hughes. And it's like Kyle with Oliver Stone and David Lynch, it was just kind of like, well, that's going to work.
Yep.
Obviously, you were a fan of the show when you heard season 3 was going to come out. Were you one of these people that thought it's never going to come back? Or when you did hear it, you were like, well, I've been waiting this whole time. Let's do this.
I did not think it was going to come back, and I was thrilled. I mean, I was nervous, but thrilled. And I think it was encouraging when Lynch quit and was brought back. You just thought, oh, now he's going to do exactly what he wants, And I was pretty on board, but I am a human being, and I definitely experienced the frustration that everybody felt about how slow it was and how long delayed Cooper's return was. I mean, I when I met Kyle, so we kind of ran into each other at a Vanity Fair party in Toronto. It was kind of like a cosmic coincidence. And he was very polite when I was like, I've been trying to get a hold of you to talk about Twin Peaks. But I said to him, the rewatch of The Return is much easier because that Cooper's coming back, and so you can just relax and enjoy Mr. C and enjoy Dougie. But I struggled with that the first time through. I was just kind of like, where's my dog? Like I want Dale back.
It's funny though, because at the time I just kind of was just like, okay, I'm just gonna let this thing take me where it goes, and finally I just gave up, and I was like, I guess Dougie's just gonna be here for a while. Yes. And again, I was really enjoying it week to week, but I gotta tell you, a few years ago, I just watched it in like 5 or 6 hour clumps, right?
Yeah.
And personally, I think it works better this way than it did week to week. I mean, obviously, I'm glad I had that experience. But now that I
agree, and I mean, I also was sort of like, quasi binging it, and I guess Lynch directed it as one 18-hour film. That's what people say, right? He didn't really even think of it as TV episodes. And yeah, it is such a world. I mean, it's a dark, dark world that it plunges you into. But yeah, and like we were saying earlier, the repetition helps with this show for whatever reason. And I think the first time through, we were all like, well, who are all these weird characters? I want to know about my favorite characters. But now a lot of them are my favorite characters, and it was interesting talking to Christabel, because she really took a lot of shit from people, I guess, in the fandom. She said, because she became emblematic of like every minute you're on screen is not Audrey on screen or whatever it was, and now having watched it again and having watched several of the episodes many times, it's like, I don't know, Tammy's a pretty cool, like, a weird character, but kind of a cool character. Like, Tammy's in my crew of characters I like now, and
I think
Diane and all the rest of it.
I think one of the issues, and it doesn't matter anymore because everything's out now, the series, the movie, the books, the missing pieces, all that stuff right now.
Yeah.
But I think one of the issues having to deal with her in that character was that Frost had released the secret history of Twin Peaks before season 3 came out.
Yeah.
And they referred to her as Tamara or Tamara Preston. And in the show, it's Tammy. So much like you're talking about John Lennon, Paul McCartney, we got Mark Frost version, and then we got David Lynch's Tammy Preston. And the woman in the book is not the woman we see in the show. Because she's she's a novice, new recruit, a Clarice Starling type of character. And in the book, she seems to be very knowledgeable about a lot of things, and is almost seems like someone who's been in the FBI for many years. People couldn't, I think, figure out like whose interpretation do we go with here.
That's interesting, because I read the book after seeing it, and so I was able to superimpose the Christabel Tammy onto the author of it, and I was like, wow, Tammy really is pretty good at her job after all. But yeah, I get it. But Christabel was a really amazing interview, and the craziest thing she told me, just in case for those who haven't read the article, when she told me that she watched The Return 3 times with David, that I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And she said that by the end of the 3rd time, it made perfect sense to her. And she gave me a great quote. She said, I don't know if it was that I had to get out of my head, but I had to get into my heart, which is like a beautiful way to put it. So she's a fascinating character. And she also gave me a very funny line, just saying, I struggled with it for a long time, and then finally realized that, David wanted it the way he wanted it. He wanted me in it, and that's all that matters. And she's like, if I had to do it over again, would I have taken some acting lessons first? Maybe. But then again, David asked me not to do that, and I just thought that was so, she's cool. Christabel is cool. But
there are scenes with her, especially in the rewatch, that may have felt like awkward and stilted on a week-to-week basis. But when you watch it in a block, it's not as noticeable when you watch it as one continuous flowing.
There's that terribly cringy scene where he and Albert are like checking her out while she's walking away. But I think that was David being self-deprecating. It's not her fault.
No, but she was actually on record saying she loved that. She's like, why can't we appreciate a woman's curves and stuff like that? So,
yeah, I mean, and also whatever, who knows? They clearly had affection for each other, and the characters had affection for each other. And at this point in history, with David gone and everything, it's like there's something I think very kind of beautiful about those scenes and those 3 people, having a connection.
All right, my last question for you is this. I saw on a Reddit AMA that somebody asked you if you were going to write a book about this or David Lynch, and you said, if people promise to buy it, I'll think about writing it. Is this something you would actually consider doing, or is that just like, this article was cool and maybe one day, but right now you're on other things?
It's a great question. I mean, if I'll give you a completely honest answer, which is that I'm trying to decide, and some of it has to do with, I have a friend of mine is an agent, and he's been really great with me, and he's just like, whatever you do, you're going to need to spend 2 years on it, so you have to be really excited about it. And I am just trying, just to be totally candid with you, I'm trying to decide if I have said my piece here enough, or if I still have enough to say to justify the 2 years. So I'm still kind of pondering it, to be honest. But it was incredibly encouraging for all of those great people to say that they would buy the book. And I sent that all to the agent. I was like, look, people will buy it.
I think people want to read things having to do with this universe by people who know what they're talking about. What I would be interested in, and this is something that I don't think you should give away on here, but I'm really interested in what your angle would be, considering that so many people have talked about this. What would be an angle that nobody you feel like has touched on quite the way that you would be able to?
Yeah, and that's part of the issue too, because Scott Meslow who was at Real Twin Peaks, and he and I hadn't met before, but we hit it off. He's a great guy. He's working on a book about effectively the production history of all 3 seasons and Firewalk with Me.
Okay.
And has interviewed like 50 at least people. That's going to be a great book. And then I saw somebody else just sold a biography of David Lynch. So yeah, that's the other piece of it is like what is a unique angle right now that can, yeah, I mean, you want to make sure it's like a book that's worth reading, not just a rehash of what other people have.
Well, that's why I loved your article, because it not only told the production history, but it clarified so many things that I myself have had to like correct with people for a long time. So I'm glad that it's like documented. So when people Google search it, your article will come up and say, no, this is, evidence that this did not happen.
Well, listen, let me tell you, I had a lot of help from a lot of people. I mean, Stephen Miller is somebody who I unfortunately didn't get to mention in the story, but he was a great resource for me, who runs the Twin Peaks blog. Josh was a great resource. Scott Ryan was a great resource. John Thorne, who did Captain Plastic, was a great resource. So I felt very privileged that they and a lot of other people too were really, really generous and welcoming. And yeah, I think I'd like to think it's because we all recognize in each other this mutual passion for the show. And I definitely was trying not to approach it as some kind of like annoying I don't know, like media person parachuting in, it was like, this was a real labor. Damon Lindelof sent me a nice note saying, this is a great story written with love. And I was like, I'm glad he got that, because it was just like a labor of love in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I was glad to see, real quick, I was glad to see that you had him involved in the article. I was pleasantly surprised that you brought in the Twin Perfect video, which is like, man, if you want to see fans either praise or rip apart, that's something.
It's funny. Ross was great, and he said he liked the article. Somebody told me, somebody on Reddit was like, "Oh, he's in hiding because he got so much crap from the fans," and he was like, "No, that's not true at all." But he was definitely stung by. He felt, I think, hurt by some of the criticism for sure. The thing that I thought was so interesting about Ross that I wasn't able to get into the article, because even though it's a really long article, there's so much stuff that I found out, is that Ross became a YouTuber because he was taking care of a sick parent at home, and he just needed something. He needed something he could do at home, and he started out doing video games, and then kind of branched out into TV stuff. I think he's very passionate. He's also, it's funny because I gave him an out. I was like, look, man, there's a whole world of all literary criticism is basically like, we're going to say what this text is, and with no regard for what the author thought. It doesn't matter what the author thought. I was like, but you're saying this is what David Lynch intended. And he said, yes, I am. I mean, I kind of love that about him. He just doubles down. He's like, no, this is what David Lynch meant. And I don't particularly think that he's right about that. And I understand why people feel like, as I said to him, he kind of violated the covenant of the fandom, where each person's supposed to be able to bring their own thing to it. But I admire his a lot of things, his thoroughness and his boldness. And he certainly picked up on 100 different things that I didn't even notice, you know, like
well, the best thing he ever did and the worst thing he ever did was call his video Twin Peaks Explained No Really, because that's why it has millions of views.
yeah,
and that's why it also has millions of people upset.
And Scott Ryan was like outraged, and then I was just like, yeah, but I mean, the guy, like, that's how you make a YouTube video that's successful, right? So
I just again, he that video has more views than any of my videos. That being said, I wouldn't have the guts to title a video that. So
hey, he's trying to make a living looking after a sick parent. So I don't know. Ross is a character, but I did enjoy the video a lot. I mean, I watched it at like 1.5 speed or something. It's definitely a video you can watch at 1.5 speed. You don't need to do a full 4+ hours.
I know people who swear by it, and I know other people that, you know, very much upset. I was just like, I love, you know, people's theories and observations, but like I was like going, yeah, but he's convincing so many people that this is the only way to look at Twin Peaks, and I think it's, you know, it's like
I hadn't thought about it that way. I could see how that would be disturbing, but you know, hopefully he's pointing people to it, and they will in the end draw their own conclusions.
At least Twin Peaks is readily available right now, as opposed to when I was growing up, and like I said, you had to just refer to the original VHS recordings that you made every Saturday night. So Mike, what are you working on right now? That's, you know, obviously not Twin Peaks related, but what are you doing right now?
What am I doing right now? I'm back to my day job at Vanity Fair as the head of digital. We're launching a new we're relaunching our flagship newsletter hopefully next week, and I'm actually you know, writing a little intro we're going to try to make it a little more of a thing that will engage our readers and our fans and give them a little backstory on what's happening each day. So I'm working on that right now, and also editing some stories and trying to figure out my next writing project. But I was off last week, so I'm just back in the saddle now. But this was such a great experience, and it really all came together better than I ever could have hoped. And honestly, I made that joking kind of reference in the story to, you know, maybe the real treasure is the friends we made along the way. But I actually do feel like, I kind of do feel that the thing that was drawing me into this was actually this community, you know, and so it's been really, really fun and exciting to get to know all these smart, passionate, offbeat people like myself, hopefully.
Well, on that note, everybody check out his article on Vanity Fair. As Twin Peaks turns 35, the mystery is still the message for a world of fans. One of these days, you know, it'll be 15 years from now, but there will be articles about the 50-year anniversary of Twin Peaks.
Right.
And yeah, so that's going to be, so I'm going to feel like an old man at that point. But anyway, Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure. Please do keep in touch. It's always nice to meet wonderful David Lynch, Mark Frost, Twin Peaks fans that know what they're talking about. So I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me tonight. And as for everybody else, make sure to like and subscribe and follow us on social media and all that. So give this video a big thumbs up, and we will see you soon. Take it easy. Have a wonderful night. Take care.